Everyone in that lawyer's office already knew how the afternoon was going to go. My brother had been certain of it for years. Honestly, so had I. My father built everything from nothing. He came to Canada in his late 20s with almost no English and a set of carpentry tools his own father had left him. He spent the first decade doing renovation work for anyone who would hire him. Kitchens, bathrooms, basement finishes in the suburbs of Ottawa. By the time I was born, he had his own small contracting business. By the time I finished high school, that business had grown into something real. White Oak Property Group, commercial renovations, heritage restorations, mid-size office builds across eastern Ontario. It wasn't a household name, but in certain circles, people knew it. My brother was 12 years older than me. He joined the company right after finishing his business degree at Carleton. My father handed him a role, then another, then eventually the title of operations director. My brother learned fast. He was ambitious, organized, and very good at making my father feel proud. At every family dinner, at every Christmas gathering, the conversation always circled back to the company. New contracts, new hires, a heritage building they were restoring in the glebe. My brother would talk and my father would listen and nod, and you could see it in his face. The relief of a man who believed his life's work was in capable hands. I became a nurse, not because I had no other options. I wanted to. I had always been drawn to that kind of work, the quiet, steady kind that doesn't get mentioned at dinner tables, but matters enormously at 3 in the morning when someone is frightened. I trained at the University of Ottawa, did my placement at the Ottawa Hospital, and eventually settled into a position in the cardiac care unit. It was demanding work. I loved it. For years, my father and I had a comfortable, easy relationship. We didn't talk about the company much because there wasn't much for me to say about it. We talked about other things. Books. Hockey. The garden he kept behind the house in Westboro. A narrow old Victorian he had bought decades ago and slowly renovated himself, room by room, the way he did everything. He grew tomatoes every summer. He had opinions about soil. He once spent an entire Sunday afternoon explaining to me why the drainage on the south side of the yard was finally correct. I miss those Sundays more than I can say. He was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition when he was 71. The early stages were subtle, a tremor in his left hand, some difficulty with balance, a slowness to his speech that hadn't been there before. The doctors were honest with us. It would worsen. It would not reverse. The timeline was uncertain, but the direction was not. My brother's response was to hire a part-time home aide and suggest we look into care facilities. My response was to show up. I want to be clear that I'm not saying this to make myself sound noble. I'm saying it because it's what happened. My father did not want to go into a facility. He was stubborn about it, in the way that people who have built things from the ground up are often stubborn. He could not imagine handing himself over to an institution any more than he could have imagined handing the company over to a stranger. He wanted to stay in the house in Westboro, the house with the garden and the crooked third stair and the kitchen window that looked out over the backyard maple. He had planted the year I was born. So I arranged my shifts around his appointments. I drove him to the neurologist at the General. I managed his medications, which became increasingly complicated as the years went on. I coordinated with his GP, learned to recognize the signs that a bad week was coming, installed grab bars in the bathroom, rearranged furniture so he could move through the house safely. When he could no longer manage the stairs reliably, I helped him set up in the main floor bedroom. When he needed help bathing, I helped him bathe. I did it without making him feel small, because I understood. From my training, from loving him, that dignity matters more than almost anything when a person is losing control of their own body. My brother visited on holidays, sometimes not even then. He was busy. The company was expanding. There were projects in Kingston, a new contract in Gatineau. He called our father every Sunday evening, and my father always said he was fine. And my brother always believed him, because it was easier to believe him. I watched 3 years pass this way. There were nights I sat in the kitchen after my father had gone to sleep, and I was so tired I couldn't form a thought. Not exhausted in a dramatic way. Just quietly, thoroughly depleted. I would make tea and sit at the table where we had eaten 1,000 meals, and I would listen to the house settle around me, and I would think, this is where I am supposed to be. That was enough. It had to be enough. My father died on a Tuesday morning in late October. He passed peacefully, in his own bed, in the house he had loved. I was there. My brother arrived an hour and a half later. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a long time without saying anything. The funeral was held at a church in Westboro. Colleagues from the company came. Old friends from the neighborhood. His immigration settlement worker from 30 years ago, a woman in her 80s who had tracked down the obituary and made the trip from Mississauga. People said kind things. People always say kind things. 2 weeks later, we gathered at the office of my father's estate lawyer downtown. The meeting was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. I arrived a few minutes early. My brother was already there with his wife, both of them in business clothes, sitting on the good side of the conference table near the window. A few cousins sat along the wall. My aunt was there, my father's younger sister, who had flown in from Vancouver. The lawyer, a measured, careful man named Mr. Pemberton, who had handled my father's affairs for over a decade, arranged his files and settled into his chair. My brother leaned over and murmured something to his wife. She smiled. I looked at the table. The reading didn't take long to reach the part everyone was waiting for. White Oak Property Group, all shares, all controlling interests, all assets associated with the business, would pass to my brother. A few people nodded. My brother sat up a little straighter. The house in Westboro, along with its contents and the property it stood on, would pass to me. That was all. At least, that was all anyone heard at first. My brother turned to look at me. He waited a beat, just long enough to make sure the room was paying attention. Then he laughed. A short, genuine laugh, not performed, which somehow made it worse. Dad always did have a sentimental side, he said. A few people shifted in their seats. He shook his head slowly, still smiling. You spent 3 years nursing him, and you got the house. He looked at me. What's that worth? 700,000? The company did 12 million in revenue last year. I didn't say anything. I had learned a long time ago that silence is more useful than most people think. He leaned back. I guess that's what you get for choosing bedpans over boardrooms. Someone at the table made a quiet sound. My aunt looked at her hands, and then my brother added, almost casually, the thing that stopped the room completely. Although, honestly, if you'd pushed a little harder, maybe the old man would have left you something worth having. The air went out of the room. I felt it go. Every person at that table felt it go. Even his wife looked away. Before I could say a word, and I was not sure what I would have said. Mr. Pemberton cleared his throat. There is one additional matter, he said. Your father asked that I address it only after the primary distribution had been announced. My brother blinked. What additional matter? Mr. Pemberton did not answer immediately. He reached into a separate folder, not the thick legal binder he had been working from, but a slim manila envelope that looked worn at the edges. Personal, the kind of thing that has been handled many times. Your father left a letter, he said. He was specific that it be read in full, to everyone present. I had not known about the letter. Something in my chest tightened. My brother waved his hand. Go ahead, then. Mr. Pemberton unfolded several handwritten pages. My father had beautiful handwriting, precise and slightly formal, the kind you sometimes see in people who learn to write in a different language first. Seeing it on those pages across the room made my breath catch. The lawyer began to read. To my family. If you are hearing this, then I have had my time, and I am grateful for it. Before anyone begins calculating what is fair, I am asking you to listen. The room was absolutely still. I built White Oak with my hands and my stubbornness and the help of people who believed in me before they had any reason to. My son learned that business, and he built on it, and for that I am proud of him. He earned his place in it. The company belongs with someone who understands what it requires. My brother nodded almost perceptibly. But I have been thinking, in these last years, about a different kind of value. Not the kind that appears on a balance sheet. The nodding stopped. One of my children showed up. Not occasionally. Not on holidays. Every week, without being asked, without expecting recognition. She learned what my medications were called. She spoke to my doctors, in the language they use, so she could understand and translate it for me. She rearranged her whole life, so that I could stay in the place I loved. Several people around the table looked down. She never once asked what she would receive. She only asked whether I needed anything. I was not going to cry. I had told myself I was not going to cry in that room in front of all those people. I cried anyway, quietly. I kept my hands flat on the table, and I looked at the window, and I let the tears come because there was nothing else to do with them. Mr. Pemberton turned the page. This is why the house in Westboro is hers. Not as a consolation, as a choice. He paused, then reached into the manila envelope and withdrew a second document. A legal certificate of some kind, several pages stapled together. There is a matter your father asked me to explain alongside the letter, he said. He set the certificate on the table. 7 years ago, he retained a land use consultant to review the Westboro property. At that time, the City of Ottawa's long-term transit expansion plan had identified the corridor along that street as a potential node for future intensification zoning. My brother frowned. What does that mean? It means, Mr. Pemberton said, that the property, the house, the lot, and the additional parcel your father quietly purchased behind it in 2019 now falls within a priority development zone under the city's official plan update. Your father had been in quiet discussions with a mid-sized development company since earlier this year regarding a long-term option agreement. Silence. The property, including the rear parcel, has been independently assessed. He slid a document across the table. The assessed development value, based on permitted density under the new zoning, is currently estimated at between $2.1 and $2.4 million. That figure will likely increase as the transit line construction proceeds. My cousin made a sound like she'd been surprised. My aunt put her hand over her mouth. My brother picked up the assessment. He read it. He set it down. He picked it up again. That can't be right, he said. It is consistent with 3 independent appraisals, Mr. Pemberton replied. He was very calm about it. The kind of calm that comes from having seen a great many things in a great many conference rooms. The house is old, my brother said. The plumbing alone. The value is in the land and the development rights, the lawyer said. Not the structure. My brother turned to look at me. For the first time that afternoon, he had nothing to add. Mr. Pemberton returned to the letter. There is one more thing I want to say, and I want to say it where everyone can hear it. The company will have my son's full attention. It carries the weight of contracts and employees and obligations I spent decades building. It is not a simple inheritance. It is a responsibility. My brother had gone very still. The house carries none of that weight. It carries only what the land is worth and what the years of love inside it are worth. I leave those things to the person who understood without being told that some things cannot be measured in revenue. People spend their lives looking for what is valuable. Your sister spent hers, making sure that I felt valued. I trust her with what comes next, because she has already shown me who she is. Mr. Pemberton folded the letter. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then, quietly, my aunt said, "He knew exactly what he was doing." My brother said nothing. He was still looking at the assessment documents. The confidence he had walked into that room with. The easy, assured confidence of a man who had never once doubted how this story would end. Was gone, not hidden. Gone. I watched it leave his face in real time, and I felt no satisfaction in it, only a strange, aching sort of grief, because none of this was what I had wanted. I had not wanted the land or the development value or the moment of reversal in a downtown conference room. I had wanted my father. I had wanted more Sundays in the garden, talking about drainage and tomatoes and things that didn't matter and mattered completely. But my father had known something that afternoon in that office became impossible to ignore. He had been paying attention, all those years, through the tremor and the slow, terrible diminishment, and the Tuesday mornings and the medications lined up on the kitchen counter. He had been watching, and he had understood what he was seeing, and he had done what he could with the time he had left. Mr. Pemberton gathered his files. The meeting concluded. People stood, gathered their coats, exchanged the kind of careful, quiet words people exchange when they are not sure what the correct response to a moment is. My brother remained in his chair. I put on my coat. I picked up my bag. I thanked Mr. Pemberton, who shook my hand with both of his and said my father had been an extraordinary man, which I already knew. At the door, I paused, not to say anything to my brother. I didn't have anything to say. I just looked back at him once, still sitting at the table, the assessment pages fanned out in front of him, and then I left. Outside, the October air was cold and clear the way Ottawa gets in the fall, that particular sharpness that always makes me feel like everything has been washed clean. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The maple trees along the street were almost bare. I thought about my father planting that maple in the backyard, the year I was born. I thought about him explaining drainage to me while I sat on the back steps. Holding a cup of coffee I was too tired to drink properly. I thought about the third stair that always creaked, and how neither of us ever fixed it because it had started to feel like part of the house, the way everything that stays long enough eventually becomes part of what you love. I had inherited a house. I had inherited land that the city had decided, in its slow institutional way, was worth something considerable. I had inherited a development option agreement and a legal certificate and the attention of a real estate company that would call me within the week to continue a conversation my father had quietly started on my behalf. But more than any of that, and I knew this, in the way you know things that don't need to be spoken, I had inherited the knowledge that he had seen me, that through everything, through the years of appointments and medications and bad nights and good mornings, he had seen exactly what I was doing, and he had found a way to say so. In the end, that was the thing no one in that conference room could calculate or contest or take from me. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes without starting the engine. Then I took a breath, and I drove home. The creak of the third stair, when I came through the door that evening, was the most familiar sound in the world. I stood in the front hall for a long time, just listening to the house around me. He had known what he was leaving me. He had always known.